Hey folks, how you doing? My name is Tim Black. Welcome to a special edition of the Tim Black Show. Today my guest is an American political activist and associate fellow at the Institute of Policy Studies. He's a former Green Party nominee for Vice President of the United States in the 2016 election and currently serves as a national organizer and spokesperson for the Black Alliance for Peace. My brother from another mother and a man that makes me want to be a better man, Ajamu Baraka. Hey Ajamu, how you doing, brother?
I'm doing very well. It's really good to be back with you, my brother. I mean, you do constantly cutting edge shows, bringing vital information. So I'm glad to be back with you to chop it up a little bit.
Absolutely, man. And to you, Ajamu, I'm dead serious when I say you're a brother that makes me want to be a better brother, man. I tell you, man, you and Dr. Cornel West are my two guiding lights. I look at what you guys talk about, what you stand for, and that kind of gets me to correct myself. As a lodestar, that's the word for it, like a lodestar. You're the North Stars. And whenever I'm going down the wrong path or I'm getting a little bit too caught up in this internet stuff, I like to look over to your Twitter profile, Jamu, and it gets me grounded, man. And I say, well, you know what? This shit right here I'm talking about, this don't mean nothing, man. I need to look at what the Jamu's got going on, man. And in light of that, I like to just jump right in, man, and say, I saw you were talking about Haiti and America's part in that and what we're not doing. And I just like to give you the opportunity to enlighten my audience, because I'm not sure they're aware of all the turmoil and America's part in that regarding Haiti.
Well, you know, Tim, I appreciate that question and the opportunity to share about Haiti. Especially to share about Haiti as it relates to Black folks. You know, it's really interesting that as a consequence of the kind of colonial education that we are exposed to in the U.S., that most of our people don't know that one of the greatest revolutions of all time took place in Haiti, where Black people rose up against the slave masters, the French slave masters. They fought the British, they fought the Spanish, and they won their independence in 1804. Most people who are honest, they elevate the Haitian Revolution even above the so-called US or American Revolution and even the so-called French Revolution, and put it right up there with the Bolshevik Revolution, no matter what you might think about that in terms of its impact on human history. So Haiti has a proud history of resistance, of being a place of refuge for Black people. Because one of the first things they did was, once they took power and once they eliminated the island of European influence, was any African who was able to escape slavery and to make it to Haiti receive automatic citizenship and support from the state. Now, the European powers did not allow Haiti to exist as an independent power. So they slapped all kinds of embargoes and tried to undermine that process. But Haiti stood strong. In fact, it stood strong enough to be able to provide material, political assistance to Simon Bolivar in the famous revolutions throughout Latin America. When he was pulling together his forces, he came to Haiti. Haiti provided him arms, training, and said one thing: when you go back and you launch this revolution, every territory that you liberate, we want you to do one thing: eliminate slavery. So the revolution in Latin America would not have been successful without the support from Haiti. So this basic history is something that everybody should know about, but very few people do. In fact, all you see now of Haiti is these images of poor Black folks, and and it kind of corresponds to the notion of how development or underdevelopment looks in the so-called global South. You see Haitians always on the run in various countries, being thrown out. But people don't know that you can find the average Haitian who who would be able to speak at least 3 languages. Haiti has one of the most sophisticated civil societies on the planet. And so what's been happening lately, Tim, is this. The US went into Haiti at the beginning of the 20th century. They physically occupied the place from 1915 to 1934. But instead of just leaving, what they did, they put in place some of their puppet governments in order to run Haiti and to protect US economic interests. And that led to the famous, some people know about the Duvaliers, Papa Doc and Baby Doc, who put in place a brutal regime that terrorized the people, but resistance continued. There was finally an uprising, and the people were able to win some degree of democracy. And in 1991, with the emergence of Aristide as president, and they were experiencing some degree of self-determination until the U.S. stepped in and had Aristide disposed. They overthrew the government, and that happened twice. They brought him back again in the early 2000s. They threw him out again in 2004. So ever since, that time has been a constant occupation on the part of the U.S., the Canadians, the French, and even the UN after the earthquake a decade or so ago. Right. But the Haitian people continue to resist, and now they are in a very intense resistance because they are in resistance to the latest of the puppet governments imposed on them by the U.S. Jovenel Moise, and his puppet regime was supposed to end on February the 7th, but he decided that he had one more year in office, and he refused to step down. The people have been in the street ever since. They thought that maybe with Biden coming into office, Biden, who is supposedly a friend of Black people, Biden, who was criticizing the Trump forces for their anti-democratic moves, they thought they might have a friend in DC, someone that will support a transition to democracy. But no, the Biden administration said basically they support Moise, and that it didn't matter that his police was involved in brutality, that he dismissed Supreme Court judges, put them in jail. It didn't matter to them because basically they wanted somebody in place that would protect U.S. interests. So we have been trying to educate people on this situation in Haiti, and we want people to know about the situation. We want people to go to our website, theblackallianceforpeace.com, sign the petition demanding that the Biden administration withdraw support for this dictator, and to educate themselves and their friends and colleagues and communities on this courageous struggle taking place on the island of Haiti. Hope that wasn't too much, brother.
No, wasn't too much at all, brother. And it just falls in line. It just reminiscent of how America works, isn't it? Where we are we're most concerned with maintaining status quo, less concerned with human rights. In fact, we support a number of human rights violators around the globe, and I'm thinking about Saudi Arabia and many others. And,
exactly. I mean, Tim, the U.S. is the number one. We consider the U.S. to be the number one violator of human rights on the planet because of its support for these various regimes, because of its subversion, its direct warmongering. And that's why it's so incredibly hypocritical that Anthony Blinken, the new Secretary of State for Joe Biden, talks about they're going to recenter a commitment to democracy and human rights. And we raise the question, when do y'all ever center democracy and human rights? So is democracy in the West, democracy in the US, concerned about the Russians interfering in the US elections? But you all can go out and not only interfere, you can undermine democracy. You can impose political leadership in Haiti, in Venezuela, and that's all right because, you all got the white man's burden. you all have the right and the responsibility, because you are the global police persons, to determine who can be in leadership in other people's nations.
Absolutely.
You know, this is the contradiction we have to deal with.
Yeah, it is a definite hypocrisy that we all bear, you know. And at times, Ajamu, when I look at what we do internationally, I know I've had conversations with Max Blumenthal regarding Venezuela and the gray zone. They do a lot of coverage of that. And as we start to dig down into it, I always feel a sense of sadness, just overwhelming sadness, but also a frustration, because the average American seems frankly, not to give a damn, brother. I was looking at one of the quotes you have on Black Alliance for Peace, guys. You need to follow Black Alliance for Peace on Twitter. The purpose is to redeveloping the Black radical traditions, anti-war and anti-imperialist positions for today's material conditions. And then when I look at your Twitter account, you say, this is his quote: "The Democrats want war with Russia. The Trump administration wants war with China, and the rest in both parties don't care who the U.S. wars with, as both parties are still committed to a pro-imperialist doctrine of full-spectrum dominance." And if we're not pushing back, all of us who are concerned with domestic issues, if we're not pushing back on what we do internationally, then we fall into that category. And that includes me and anyone else. And that's a daunting realization, brother.
It really is. And I'm glad you of course you're going to see that, because it does make everyone complicit. If you're not in resistance to the criminality of your own government, then basically you are complicit. You are morally complicit. And that's really the issue, that we say constantly, you cannot define yourself as a so-called progressive or even a radical and only be concerned with the US. You have this US-centric perspective. That basically it means that you are in moral alignment with what's happening in Haiti, with what is happening in Saudi Arabia, and in Syria and in Iraq, and you supported the destruction of Libya by the US government under your first Black president, that you support the coup in Honduras under your first Black president, and the coup in Ukraine, and the coup in Egypt, and the expansion of drone warfare. You know, if you're not in opposition, then basically you are in moral collusion with those kind of activities. Plus, for us, Tim, coming out of the Black movement, you know, we've always been internationalists. And therefore, you know, we've always been connected to the struggles of oppressed and colonized people globally. And it's only been in the last decade and a half or so that we've had this really dramatic, inwardly looking kind of politics. And part of that was facilitated with the emergence of Barack Hussein Obama. We say, some of us say Barack Insane Obama, because it helped to move public opinion, Black public opinion, dramatically to the right. We became, quote unquote, Americans. We, you know, the enemies of the US ruling class became our enemies, you know, because, you know, Barack was our president. So, you know, we have a lot of work to do to sort of bring folks back to sanity. And that's why we launched the Black Alliance for Peace in April of 2017. We saw an opportunity at that point to launch this organization. We felt like this would be a point where we could help to bring our people back to sanity. And we knew that the trajectory of US politics was such that, because of a deep, deep legitimation crisis that really resulted in the election of Donald Trump, we knew that the state was going to be more and more dependent on the use of force and violence. And we needed to have a popular movement to oppose that. Like that quote you just read, you know, the Republicans have a position that is in support of US imperialism. The Democrats have a position in support of US imperialism. And who gets caught in the middle? the people in those countries, and the people here who are going to be asked and have been asked to go and fight somebody else's war, the wars of the ruling class. So we have to make sure we can wake people up so they can be resistant, so they can understand that their interests are not the same interests as the ruling elite that wants to assert this concept of full spectrum dominance. And people need to understand what that means. They have, as part of their national security strategy, the notion that the US should continue to rule the world. And it's across the spectrum, economically, politically, and militarily. And in that rule, they perceive that any regional power that seems to threaten their global rule, that those regional powers will be targeted and destroyed. That's why they went in and destroyed Libya, to undermine the African continent. That's why they then targeted and intensified the subversion of Venezuela in Latin America to control that region. That's why they are moving to mobilize against the Chinese. So this is part of their mad strategy to maintain the dominance, the global hegemony of not only the US, but their Western powers. What is Biden's mission right now? Biden says, his mission says now they want to revamp, revitalize the Atlanticist relationship between the US and Western European powers. What does that mean? If you unpackage that, what that means is we want to revive the coalition of white power. We've got to be hip to this and build a resistance not only among African people or Black people, but among all people who would like to see peace, who want to just live in conditions where they can thrive and live like decent human beings. If we don't take power from these criminals, then all of us are going to be doomed.
You know, just listening to as you brought up Barack Obama, man, and something new. I had a new thought, brother, that I haven't had before regarding his presidency. It did, in fact, give Black people a false sense of inclusion in this country, as if now we had skin in the game, and now the aims of the United States is somehow we're involved in that, like we're included in this in the outcomes or the positive benefits of this country, of the spoils, so to speak. And that's very detrimental that a lot of Black folks see it that way. And you're right, I don't think before that we ever looked at ourselves as being a part of the system. We did see ourselves more connected to our brothers and sisters around the globe of basically any other pigmentation, frankly. I mean, we would always see us in a line with the rebels or with people who are outside of Western white supremacy, so to speak.
Well, yeah, we always had a healthy suspicion of U.S. policies. We questioned things that were coming out of Washington. We didn't automatically assume that it was true. And you're right, we've always, the most consistently anti-war community in the country has been Black people. And so, yeah, that's been shifting. But I'm gonna tell you, Tim, it started really, the shift started in the 1980s and really picked up in the 1990s. And what happened was in the 1970s, there was, as part of the attempt to destroy the militant Black liberation movement, the FBI and all the other intelligence agencies, along with elements of the private sector, they conspired to try to create the conditions in which another generation that emerged in the 1960s and 70s will ever emerge again. And so the objective was not only to crush us militarily, but also to shift us psychologically, to shift our consciousness. And what they wanted to do was to, in fact, make us an American. Very similar to what they did with the indigenous people when, after they had conquered this territory we call the U.S., they started taking indigenous children from their people and putting them in these boarding camps. And the objective there was to basically murder psychologically, spiritually, the Indian. They said we want to kill the Indian in order to save the man. So while we didn't have it in that way, what they did start doing was forced busing. And I don't want to get into that. There's a whole lot of process, but basically the culmination of all of that, in my opinion, was with the ascendancy of Barack Hussein Obama. And that's when it was solidified that we became Americans. The Chinese were our enemy, or whoever they put in front of us became our enemies, the Cubans or whatever. We have never been that sort of, I don't want to use a bad word. We have never been that easily manipulated before.
That naive. We're part of the team now. No, you're not a part of the team. And I remind my poor white folks, you ain't a part of the team either. You just think you
exactly.
are. They just use you as a tool, like they do us. They don't like you either. They just like us a little less. When you bring up the FBI and how they had a concerted effort to undermine our radicals and revolutionaries, I'm brought to the Fred Hampton movie, Judas and the Black Messiah. And I'll just say personally, Ajamu, I like the movie. But I go in with different expectations than some of my ADOS friends, because I don't expect you to get a true biography of Fred Hampton in a major news house. To be true to his legacy, to talk specifically about all the great work Black Panthers did. And I don't expect that from America. But what I did expect, or what I was happy to get, was a story that whet the appetite of many people who didn't even know who Fred Hampton was. They've been trying to get this movie done for a couple of decades, and I think it wasn't so much about a snitch. I walked away thinking, at least people now will know what I'm talking about when I say don't trust the FBI, because I've been sitting around Ajamu watching in disillusionment, watching Black people go, yeah, we like Comey. Yeah, we like the FBI. And I'm like, what the hell? When did we start trusting the Federal Bureau of Investigations? You guys remember MLK? So I like that this movie, for me, reminded Black folks and some white folks who are learning for the first time just how dastardly, underhanded, and dirty America was to Americans. What's your take on the movie, and what are your thoughts?
Well, first, let me say that I completely agree with your position. But let me say I haven't seen the movie yet. Because as I shared with you, I'm outside the country, been here for a while, and so don't have access to it. But I've been reading. I knew of the script. Rosa Clemente, who's one of the associate producers on the movie, is a friend of mine. So I kind of had a sense of what was coming down the pipe, and been a part of some of these conversations after the movie came out. And I agree that we have no illusions about where we are and what kinds of cultural products will be produced in this country. And so when there's an opportunity for us to have a different storyline, a story of a very significant point in our history with a very significant individual that helps people to think about things in a different way, in a mass way. Because like you said, millions of people who have never heard of Fred Hampton. They heard about the Panthers. They have all kind of ideas, some correct, many incorrect. But now they have a sense of another story, another body of work, another approach to looking at and engaging reality. And that is a good thing. That is the foundation that we can continue to work from. It's just like, Tim, the conversations that some people had around Bernie Sanders. I didn't care if you thought the Bernie Sanders socialism wasn't the best socialism or the most developed socialism or whatever. The question is, before Bernie Sanders, who was talking about socialism? Nobody. Who was talking about, the 1% in a mass-based way, and class issues? Nobody. You couldn't penetrate the bourgeois media, okay? So if his approach isn't as revolutionary as you think it should be, then build on that. Okay, I'm not going to engage myself in arguments about how unrevolutionary Bernie Sanders was. That's silly.
Mm-hmm.
The same thing with this movie. Okay, yeah, they're not going to make a movie that you and I would make coming out of Hollywood, but they make something that we can help to shift consciousness. Then it's on us to do that. Okay, so yeah, I want to see the movie, but I think that you're right. I think you're absolutely crystal clear on this. That it helps people to understand that it makes no sense. It's ahistorical, as a matter of fact, for you all to be told by the Democrats that Comey and the FBI and the CIA are your friends now. It should just be a reflection of how much work you need to do if you think that is a reality. You need to be aware of the real history of those agencies, the murder of Dr. King, the murder of Malcolm X, the undermining of our movement, and the FBI and their dastardly deeds go back decades. So, we need to rethink this, but this is part of what we're talking about. We in a struggle for consciousness. Okay. You can't have resistance until you have consciousness changing. Okay. You can't have a vision without a certain kind of awareness, certain kind of consciousness. So, in this sort of ideological struggle, the struggle over ideals, we use these cultural products to the extent that we can. So, even having to snitch, again, reminds us of the kind of things that the FBI was involved in, So, yeah, I think this is a very important product, something that we have to utilize. It has already sparked people to go back and look at some of the documentaries that have been circulating for years and, had a couple of thousand views, but now people are going back and looking at them again. People are talking about this film on the elementary level, the high school level. So yeah, this is something very significant, especially at this time, Tim, that people are starting to actually become more radicalized when they see the real limitations of the system. They are seeing that there is, in fact, a difference between us and our interests and the interests of the capitalist elite. They just want to drive us to work, to make money for them. So all of this is coming together. There's an interesting kind of conversion taking place.
A convergence. Yeah, a weird, a strange convergence, and in some ways, I feel hopeful that just the recent developments with the uprising, with what they did at the Capitol, and people call it insurgency, a failed coup. I don't know if I go that far, but I would say we had a bunch of upset white folks storm the Capitol, and I'm mixed because I am happy to see people being discontent, okay? Discontent about America and finally waking up, realizing to a certain extent, hey, something ain't right. Something's not right. And I've been so long watching white folks kind of just walk around in the stupor wondering what's next on Netflix. What's new, or who picking up a Grammy. Just to see people being engaged in any form is better than no form at all. But it seems like the media wants to continue to feed on this thing. It's a month later, and they got nothing new to talk about because Trump's gone, and they're still talking about this day. And I'm like, okay, are we going to be able to push people forward? And how do we do that? So what was your take on that unrest here in the States? And I guess the Republicans and the far right kicking and screaming because they lost their white supremacist leader.
Mm-hmm. Well, Tim, is very interesting. You can't even understand January 6th until you go all the way back to the beginning of the Trump presidency. And you go back to the beginning of it, and you see the kinds of attempts on the part of the ruling elite that never really relinquished power to Donald Trump. So people have to understand that because you sit in the White House, doesn't mean you have complete control of the state. Donald Trump was not allowed to even control the state. He sat in the White House, but what they did, they created conditions to make it very difficult, if not almost impossible, for him to govern. And when he was able to quote unquote govern, it was in order to pass legislation that was going to be beneficial to the ruling elite, like the tax cut. Okay, so Donald Trump and his forces saw from the very beginning that they were being subjected to what they perceived to be unfair behavior on the part of these powerful forces. The very fact that they even suggested that he was the Manchurian candidate controlled by the Russians.
Right.
And they said openly and repeatedly that he was illegitimate. Remember, all the Democrats said that he's not my president. Okay. And remember, even up to the counting of the electoral ballots, many people were still protesting and opposed to Donald Trump.
That's right.
So, when you look at how they on the so-called right, or the Donald Trump forces, were looking at the behavior of the Democrats and the liberals, they have a whole narrative, Tim, where they really feel aggrieved, and for them, it wasn't just their concerns around the election being stolen, quote unquote, but the whole 4 years of his presidency that they see as a vast conspiracy, interesting enough. Because they talk, when the liberals talk about everybody on the right are conspiracy theorists, but they see a conspiracy to undermine their man. So you can't understand the anger of these white folks that showed up in January unless you understand that narrative on the right.
And that's not saying that Ajamu agrees with them, but
exactly,
people don't recognize that we have two sides of this, and people have their own theories. Hey, I'm still stuck on 2016 and my theories of how we ended up, with Trump to begin with. And I don't mean Russia, but I mean within the Democratic Party. I'm talking about the primaries. I'm still living in primary land with Bernie, so I got my own narrative. So there are other sides to this issue, and just like the so-called Democrats have their theories, regarding Trump, the Republicans or conservatives or whatever they call themselves, they got their own theories. So all that's converging, brother. It's
exactly. And it's interesting that you and I appreciate what you just said, because whenever we start talking about this whole Trump phenomenon, if you don't really start off with the sort of obligatory Trump ain't shit kind of a narrative, then they think you may be in fact a Trump supporter.
Yeah.
But those of us who think, we have to look at this stuff objectively. So before I can even get to January 6th, I got to look at this other stuff and give it some context. So these folks are angry because many of them believe that the election was in fact stolen. They believe that there was some funny business with the voting process. Okay, and so Donald Trump played on that. Donald Trump exercised his legal right to file suits, to challenge the results. Oh, that's part of the process, okay? But what's interesting was how the liberals kind of framed that, that this is part of some kind of nefarious activity on Donald Trump's side. He wouldn't accept the fact that the media called the election. And Donald Trump's forces are saying, when do you all get a chance to, who are you all?
Right.
When do you all get a chance to call the election? We have some serious questions, okay? And the media went crazy. It's like, how dare you raise up an obvious question like this? Because we've been doing it for decades, So yeah, they were angry, Tim. So when they got to January 6th, they were angry. They saw their people being unfairly treated. Did they really decide, was that really some kind of coup attempt? Come on. I work in the global South. We know what coups look like, okay? And especially when you know that most coups are being organized coming out of Washington, D.C. And when they exercise a coup, it's a coup with military force and people dying and everything else, okay? Was it an insurrection? Would it have been an insurrection if, for example, when Congress was pretending to debate the stimulus, but they weren't really coming up with something really of real significance. If poor people would organize a march in DC and then decided to run up in the Capitol and basically surround the Capitol and force them to pass legislation that would address their material needs, would that have been an insurrection? No, that would have been a militant action, of course, but an insurrection, but that's what that's the kind of terms states use to delegitimize activity. Okay, so look, there's some hardcore fascistic elements involved in that thing on January 6th, no question about that. Okay, no question at all. But what they're trying to do now, Tim, because they are concerned about Trump and about his base, they are now not only attempted to delegitimize Trump, but by extension, they are delegitimizing and almost criminalizing 75 million people who voted for him. And I'm saying you all are making a mistake. You all are helping to elevate the hardcore of that opposition. And you're pushing more and more people away from, traditional politics, because they said on the right that January 6th was going to be the beginning of a civil war. And in fact, Tim, they predicted almost everything that's happening, including the censorship, including the jailing of their leaders. They are predicted it. And these fools are playing right into it. So they are helping to create a hardcore fascistic opposition. And, they playing with fire because, some of these white folks they ready to go all the way.
Yeah. I think it was Dave Chappelle that said white people had to deal with being treated like black people for 30 minutes and they couldn't handle it. They busted to the Capitol and wiped feces on the walls. They lost their minds. They tried to beat the cop to death with the American flag. That's how they responded to being treated like black folks for a couple of minutes. I've said, Ajamu, that while the Democrats try to come up with a way to prevent a future Trump, they're grasping at straws. I mean, what they really need to do is make changes in this country that materially impact Republicans, conservatives, Democrats, progressives, all of us. That's how you get rid of Trump. That's your inoculation from Trump, is you actually do what you say you're going to do and somehow, make people whole, or stimulus checks and, infrastructure and jobs and healthcare. And instead of doing that, they'd rather continue the culture wars. What do you say about, I think Biden's going to further expose that there's really one party in this country. What do you think is going to happen now that Biden's in there?
I think that exposure, there's only one party, and that the ruling class will coalesce around whatever political tendency represents their interest. I think that was exposed in 2016, when you had massive numbers of Republicans and elements of the economic elite shift their allegiance to Hillary Clinton, because they were so concerned about Donald Trump coming in and undermining the architecture of the international neoliberal order. They were pissed at Donald Trump for forcing them to withdraw from the Trans-Pacific Partnership, for example. They were concerned about his rhetoric about renegotiating the NAFTA, okay? Because they had carefully constructed this international architecture for the last 70 years, and they didn't want any disruption of that. And Donald Trump represented a social force that said, you elites, you all have taken jobs out the U.S. You have no loyalty to the U.S. This is that nationalist line. We have bared the consequence of that. And we say no more. We say America first. See, and Donald Trump was hip enough to understand that resonated. Now, of course, there was all kind of xenophobic kind of stuff related to that in terms of issues around immigration and build the wall and all of that, and played some of the most backward elements of U.S. society. No question about that. But, as you said earlier, they were building on these real concerns, this confusion on the part of white folks who believed that they had a God-given right to live a privileged life, but yet they weren't being able to experience that, and they didn't have the theoretical framework to understand it. So of course Donald Trump could come and say, you know, you all are suffering, you all losing your jobs because them lazy black folks who are getting government subsidies and they ain't doing nothing, and they taking your jobs, and you got those people coming across the border, they taking your jobs, and then you got the elite that's doing X, Y, and Z, and it resonated. You know, that's the core, that's the foundation for that kind of right-wing politics. But yeah, you're right. If you had people who have been speaking to the needs of working class people, and even people who are part of what the lower elements of the middle class, or what some of us call the petty bourgeoisie, then it'd be a different kind of situation. Theoretically, the Democratic Party is supposed to be that party that is representative of the working class. But we know that from the 1990s, they basically have thrown in with Wall Street, with international finance capital, okay? And so, you know, they can't even construct a campaign with the rhetoric that can keep the working class intact. Look, we remember, me and you talked about this after 2016. The Democrats can't even explain how it was that 9 million white workers who voted for Barack Obama in 2012 turned around and voted for Donald Trump in 2016. They can't explain today how, after all this anti-Trumpism from the corporate media, that he expanded his base by 11 million more people. All these people were just motivated by racism? Come on, you know, we got to be, see, as Black people, we can't be that ignorant. We've got to understand what is really in play, because we got to be prepared. We got to be able to advance our forces when we can. We can't get caught up in this simplistic kind of stuff coming from liberal white folks, because they will mess us up, okay? So we've got to really understand what are the objective conditions out there to help to explain this political phenomenon, you know? Why is it, how do you explain with all the anti-immigrant rhetoric, how do you explain the expansion of support for Donald Trump in the Latino community?
There it is.
There's other elements involved here, folks. You know, is it because he even just in rhetoric, he's speaking to some of the needs and interests of those folks? You know, why is it you have the Democrats who, you know, here in the midst of this pandemic, where it's been exposed that one of the reasons why so many people have died unnecessarily in this country is because we have no national health service, that we have a privatized health delivery service, you know, but yet you have a Democrat candidate that says that if the people, through their representatives, had supported a Medicare for all bill, and if it came to his desk, he would veto it. What? Yeah. Whose interests are you serving? Okay. And why not? Why wasn't that a bigger issue? Look, and you know, and I know you do because you guys watching your shows. The Democrats were not concerned with Donald Trump at the beginning of 2020. Everybody understood Donald Trump was heading to a second term. Therefore, the Democrats turned their attention on trying to keep control of their cash cow, the Democrat Party. And that meant one thing: stopping Bernie Sanders.
Yes.
Okay? They didn't care about, because they didn't think that none of those candidates could really win anyway, besides Bernie. And the issue wasn't that they thought Bernie would lose. The issue was they knew Bernie would win. And Bernie had an independent economic base, okay? So they shifted toward Bernie. It wasn't until Donald Trump started mismanaging the COVID situation, and it started becoming obvious really by March, April, that they said, well, wait a minute, maybe we can take this thing too, you know? And they started looking, but at that point, they had almost done Bernie in, because Bernie's people cracked at first. And then Bernie cracked and surrendered. It surrendered at a point, Tim, where, can you imagine in April and May, if Bernie would have stayed in with this pandemic as it got deeper, the whole argument around Medicare for all? it would have taken off. But then Bernie took himself off the battlefield because what? He really believed, I think, that Donald Trump was a existential threat and they needed to come together to defeat him. I think that was a historic mistake. It was even worse than the mistake he made in 2016 by not really fighting. And so, you know, they saw by the summer that Trump was wounded, and the rest is history.
I wish I could push back on it at some points, but I really can't, man. I have to reluctantly agree that Bernie Sanders, you know, if he would have stayed in it, who knows what would have happened. I mean, you're right. I mean, he has the selling message. Like I've always Medicare for all is such a no-brainer. It's such a no-brainer, and it being highlighted so much more about COVID-19. It's a layup. I mean, it already has more approval, a very popular piece of legislation across Democrats, but also Republicans even view it positively. And then now that you have even more people out of work, and more people's, you know, most people's, you know, insurance or medical coverage is tied to their place of employment, it's a no-brainer, man. And so who's the real fascist? You got a president, you pointed out. Biden said, even if we go through the democratic process and the people speak and the people say we want Medicare for all, he's gonna overrule everything the people say and do what he thinks is right. Okay, but Trump's a fascist and Biden isn't a fascist, right? It's just different levels of different degrees of fascism.
But Tim, can I comment on that?
Sure, brother.
Because you know that is a serious question. Because what happened once the real powers to be were able to move against Donald Trump after January 6th? Talking about fascists and talking about coups and everything else, they disappeared the president of the United States. They took him off of social media.
Yeah.
He basically disappeared before his term was up. That should have been an obvious piece of evidence in terms of who really runs things in the U.S. Okay, you all say he was responsible for January 6th, and therefore he was potentially dangerous, and you suspend his Twitter account for 2 weeks. Okay, all right. How do you come back and then say you want to permanently keep him off of Twitter with 88 million followers? It shows, you know, if you're thinking and watching, who's really running the country. That basically it ain't Donald Trump and his people. It is this super elite. It's this coalition between Silicon Valley, that is big tech, you know, the military industrial complex, finance capital, and the intelligence agencies. That makes up the state. Even those private corporations that are theoretically private, they are part of what we call the state ideological apparatus, okay? And they're the ones that really control things. And they have basically, and what they're doing now, not only did they disappear Donald Trump, as I said earlier, they're trying to split the Republican Party. They want to delegitimize it permanently because they were really shaken by that January 6th event, okay? And what they're doing now to ensure that they can keep politics in the middle, talking about who's a fascist, now they involve in systematic censorship. They had us like, oh, get rid of the white racists, and yes, they took them down, and then they start systematically moving against the so-called left. And we told people you can't allow that. You've got to defend the notion, the bourgeois notion of freedom of speech and access to information. Okay, you know, you can't say that if you make that argument, you're just supporting right-wing fascists. No, you can't allow them to use this as a device to constrict political space, ideological and political space. Okay, so now almost every week we hear. Yesterday, 2 days ago, they kicked off Cold Pink. Cold Pink for a while. They came back, but kicked them off. You can't even raise an issue around. You got to be careful how you word things around Israel now. You know, you can't. I mean, it's like it's getting crazy.
Yeah.
You had Maximum on your show. Look at what they're going through at the Gray Zone. Look at what we're going through at the Black Agenda Report. You know, everybody's being delegitimized. You better be careful, because anybody who's saying anything that could be critical of how the system operates or whatever, you liable to be thrown off. You might get thrown off because you brought Ajamu Baraka on. Who knows? I mean, you know.
It's possible. It is what it is. Okay. Look, we can't operate in fear, though, brother. You know what I'm saying? Because that's what it is. That's if it becomes that way. You know, I look at it like my youngest son is 12 years old, and whenever I buy him something new, like a toy or video game, he doesn't know it, but I'm always thinking this is my form of collateral. You know, because unless you're going to resort to corporal punishment with kids, you got to have something that they like that you could take away from them to control them. And as you were talking about social media, I was thinking, yeah, they give us this social media and it's now part of life and people want it, people use it. First thing they do is they get up and they check their Twitter, they check their Facebook, and now to lose that, that's like a psychological, like, I don't know, sort of like torture. I mean, literally, I've heard stories, and this wasn't adults, but teenagers committed suicide because they couldn't get on Facebook. Suicide because of something someone said on Twitter. So there are some definitely.
Well,
But look
what they do on Facebook, though, Tim. When you say that point about taking it away, so when you violate their community standards, then they exclude you from the community for 30 days or whatever. They know that's a real punishment. That's some power. They have moved, like I said, they moved all of us into social media. We're used to it as our source of information, and to be ejected from that, you experience almost a form of social death. That's a powerful weapon.
It's a powerful weapon, brother, and definitely can't. And then when you tie economics to it, wow, when we're during the pandemic and we have people who rely on their ability to create content in order to sustain themselves. There's no stimulus. And I have colleagues that work in this field, and this is what we do to provide for our families. And they are getting deplatformed, Ajamu, for very basic coverage, the same coverage you get on MSNBC, but taking a different tact. And they become deplatformed, lose all sorts of being able to create revenue.
Yes.
What does that do? That makes them either shut up and stop talking about these issues, which gives the system a way to control our voices, so to speak, without necessarily like coming and getting you in the middle of the night, which back in 2016 used to be a real fear. Because my mom used to say, Tim, I saw your video and you said some stuff about Hillary. Does the wife have insurance on you? Because she was really concerned. But now we know there's other ways they get you. They just deplatform you, take the money out your pocket, and then what you gonna do?
Exactly. That's a real issue. That is a real material force, and it is causing some people to have to rethink some stuff and to tone down. And like you said, when it happens, where is critical thinking at that point? That plays right into the power of the system. That is what some of us call totalitarianism. And who is the forces behind that? Is it Donald Trump and his people? It is your friendly liberal. They're the ones been pushing a neoliberal totalitarianism.
And they don't even realize, Ajamu, not to cut you off, but even the well-intentioned liberal who thinks, because what they do is they use the Jedi mind trick on you. They say these people are racist, and if you were a good ally to black people, you got to let us get rid of these racists, because these racists are horrible. You don't agree with these racists, do you? They're like, no, I don't want to be seen as racist. And they are playing into the hands of the oppression, their own totalitarianism. They're playing into it unwittingly, some of them.
Exactly. No, that's true. And see, that's why I take on the whole term of a whole idea of what is racist, what is white supremacy. Because for me, Joe Biden is a white supremacist.
Yes.
Joe Biden who can support Black death in Haiti and in Venezuela and in Cuba. And Joe Biden who could be part of an administration that puts in place a regime in Libya after they destroy it, where they bring back slave markets and stuff.
Yes.
So no, white supremacy has to be understood in a broader and different kind of way. some of the real white supremacists are the ones that are slick, but yet they are committed to upholding the interests and the power of white folks in the U.S. and in Europe. It is like what Malcolm said, the difference between the wolf and the fox.
But before you go, Ajamu, I definitely want everyone to know where to go to find out more about what your work is and what's going on with the Black Alliance for Peace. But you sent out a tweet, brother, about Neera Tanden. And I gotta get you to elaborate on this, because I'm one of those people that was critical of Neera Tanden being chosen for anything in my government, the government that oversees, that's over me. Neera Tanden is horrible, and not just because of tweets. It's because of her ideology, a lot of statements she's made, a lot of stances she's taken, and I feel the corruption of that organization. But you said in your tweet, and I'm paraphrasing, it's funny how people are so upset about Neera Tanden, and that's cool, but there's a whole lot of corrupt people being put into the Biden administration, and y'all are quiet as hell about that. So I think you're right about that. You mind elaborating a little bit on that thought?
Yeah, that was really the point. I mean, why was the focus on her? I mean, like you said, she's the Center for Democratic Renewal, Center for American Progress.
That's it.
I've been having to deal with them for years. They ain't about nothing. But why her? Necessarily, you all these other folks up in there that you all haven't said anything about, but why her? So look, I understand that the Bernie folks are really upset with her too, but some of the other people is inconsistent. In some ways, maybe she is being treated unfairly, but I think she's going to be the sacrificial lamb, because you always got to have one or two of them that don't make it, and I think she's been chosen as one of them.
Yeah, I don't think he ever really wanted her. I think it's just throw us off the scent of the other swamp creatures he's bringing in, and she attracts a lot of attention. You know what I mean? Because she's been so toxic. But that just goes to show you could be powerful, because she's a very powerful woman. You'd be very powerful, and still the system will use you for its own ends, no matter who you are. Ajamu, where do people go to find out more about you and the Black Alliance for Peace?
Please go to blackallianceforpeace.com. Is a website that has all kind of information. There you can sign the petitions we have on Haiti and Afghanistan. We get a chance to talk about that. And please, you can follow me. I'm starting to really pump this now on Twitter at Ajamu Baraka. So follow me, because I want to start pushing this thing out. I got a lot. I mean, it's starting to come up now, but I never pushed it. So I'm now remembering to tell people to go to at Ajamu Baraka to follow me on Twitter. What, people
didn't know about your Twitter account?
Well, I don't pump it, and people have been telling me for the last few years that I need to start remembering to pump it.
Oh, then definitely, man, absolutely. Ajamu's got a great thread, a great timeline, guys. If you don't know about it, find out about it at Ajamu Baraka on Twitter, and the Black Alliance for Peace. I'm gonna put links in the description box below to everything, because definitely want to help you spread the word about your work, Ajamu, and the work of your organization, brother. Thank you once again for taking time out, man. It's always a pleasure to speak with you, man. Thank you for dropping those jewels, my friend.
My pleasure. I really enjoy these conversations. So let's do it again soon, my brother.
Let's do it. Now, look, we don't need to take a 2-year break. What is it, 2-3 years? I got to do better, brother. Yeah. I promise to do better on that.
Okay.
Don't fall for the banana in the tailpipe. Don't be fooled by corporate media talking heads misleading the people. Get your news and information from an entity that keeps it real. Tim Black. Tim Black is the host of The Tim Black Show. Independent news that leaves you informed, inspired, and sometimes entertained, but always in the know. Go to timblacktv.com and sign up today. The Tim Black Show is news for people who can't stand the news. See you there.